So seeking tends to start at some point in people's life. It can be a light seeking that is entertaining to some extent, because through the process of seeking more and more becomes understood and seen, and that can happen in the form of insight, which is usually quite amazing because it has a quality that's different to an understanding in the mind. And the process itself, if it's not accompanied by deep suffering, can seem to be this magical ride that we get taken on, that where everything is revealed. Everything, which book to read, at what time, and which country to travel on, and who comes across our path is exactly what is needed at that point in time, and all contributes to this process of life becoming more understood. Insights happen, and can be seen to be a very magical journey we're being taken on. Or it can be a journey that's inspired by a deeper suffering, and to some extent those journeys can seem like they're not taking us anywhere for a period of time, where the suffering remains fairly constant, and yet there is this recognition that there is suffering and a desire to move away from it, or to find a solution to it. And seeking or spirituality presents itself as a potential answer, yet for a while it doesn't seem like too much is happening, and it can be very frustrating. And if this perpetuates for an extended period of time, either or, whether it's a light journey or a intense journey, after a certain period of time, enough's enough. And even what seemed like an enjoyable process of seeking can then present itself as being a bit of a nuisance. It's like, okay, long enough now, so let's get to the point. So the beginning of the talks often starts at the question, what is it that we're seeking? Because if that isn't clear, the seeking could perpetuate itself for longer than needed, simply because each time an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to try something new is presented, the impulse is that, well, this might be what I need, so let me try it. Whereas if the understanding about what is being sought is very specific, then the thinking process and the engagement in various things will be limited to whatever seems like it will contribute to that goal, which is now very specific. So the beginning of the talk often starts with the question, so what is it that we're actually seeking? People have been living life for tens of years through the course of their life, seeking primarily happiness. I think when everyone gets down to it, they want to be happy, but that seeking has been in the form of seeking happiness through pleasure. And as is always mentioned, these concepts are pointers that you can take away and test for yourself. It's not just about listening to the words and maybe they're put together in a nice way and going, yes, that's right. The point of it is that whatever is said should be tested and verified for yourself, to make sure that the whole conceptual framework is something you want to work within. So we can see from our own experience and by watching others, most people are looking for happiness, but they're looking for happiness in circumstance or in pleasure. Happiness through pleasure. And we know that to be the case for ourselves, because if it's happening, we can see our movement, and the movement in life, the effort is going towards achieving something in the future. And if we feel into what is being worked on with the aim of achieving something in the future, you can feel that deep down inside there is a sense that when I get this, then everything will be okay. When my business gets to a certain size and I feel comfortable that I'll be able to retire at retirement age, then everything will be okay. When I get out of my marriage that isn't working so well, then everything will be okay. When my kids grow up and they're no longer at home and me and my wife can travel and enjoy life, then everything will be okay. When I get that promotion at work, everything will be okay. And it can extend to a new house in a new suburb, an upgrade of the car, new clothes, something you saw advertised on TV. And this way of engaging in life, which becomes unconscious, becomes the only way that life is engaged in, especially if seeking hasn't happened, is because there's a belief that my happiness, my completeness, can be fulfilled by pleasure. And if we look at our own experience, we can see that those pleasures are achieved time after time. The pleasure is there for a limited amount of time. And yeah, and then after the pleasure is achieved, hello Ankita. Good to see you.
Okay.
Hello. So we were just talking about how we seem to be seeking happiness through pleasure, and that from our own experience, these pleasures are achieved and they deliver short-term satisfaction or a short-term pleasure, and then very quickly the next goal is set up, and this keeps happening. And so at some point in time we have to draw the conclusion for ourselves that pleasure is pleasure, but it's only ever limited, and to think that we will one day find a pleasure that delivers a long-term continuous peace of mind or well-being or happiness can finally be put to rest if our awareness lands on the fact that we've been achieving pleasures month after month, year after year, and they're temporary and never deliver a full long-term sense of well-being. So that's a very important recognition to have, because the motivation then to keep following this pursuit of pleasures can start to be challenged. And that's a habit that is supporting a sense of who we are. It's supporting a false sense of who we are, because it suggests that what we are is firstly incomplete, and secondly it suggests that what we are as an incomplete being can be fulfilled through the acquisition of things in the flow of life. So at some point, if we then ask ourselves, so what are we really looking for? We've been looking for happiness through pleasure, and it wasn't to be found there. So if we ask ourselves in practical terms, so we can test it for ourselves, what is our unhappiness in the flow of life? And so moment to moment or day to day, if we find ourselves feeling unhappy and we say, yes, at this point I know that I'm unhappy and I'd like to understand what that unhappiness is. And it might be a mild unhappiness or a deep unhappiness. And if we settle in onto the feeling and feel in, we'll find that that unhappiness is a form of uncomfortableness with oneself. The feeling is a feeling of uncomfortableness with oneself, or an uncomfortableness with the other, or an uncomfortableness with life, all of which ultimately are an uncomfortableness with oneself. And once we've felt that it's an uncomfortableness with oneself, it's worthwhile seeing how that uncomfortableness is manifesting. And we'll find that it will be manifesting in one of the following ways: guilt or blame, or expectation. There are some less significant ones, which are pride and anxiety. But primarily, to start with, we can look at guilt and blame and expectation. So this is a very practical way of coming to understand what it is that our unhappiness is. Not only conceptually, but actually through feeling and coming to know for ourselves. And that uncomfortableness, guilt and blame, is based on the idea that firstly, I need pleasure in order to be complete, and secondly, when that pleasure isn't delivered in the flow of life, if pain is delivered, then there is blame towards the other person who has delivered the pain. So, you hurt me, I hate you. You have disturbed my unhappiness by delivering pain to me, and so therefore I have to hate you. You should have or could have done things differently. You could have delivered pleasure to me instead. If you had delivered pleasure to me, I would have loved you, but unfortunately you delivered pain to me, so I hate you. That's what blame in the moment is. And that blame can take different forms. There can be resentment, there can be hatred, there can be blame for someone not doing the dishes, there can be jealousy. Guilt is another form of uncomfortableness, and it's still based on the same sense of personal doership that blame is based on, but instead of it being projected and there being hatred for the other, for what they are seen to have done, this time guilt is about feeling a hatred towards oneself for actions that have happened in life that have hurt others or hurt ourselves, and therefore we feel that we should have or could have done something differently. And in feeling that we should or could have done something differently, we have to blame ourselves, and that blame is guilt. So there's blame for the other, for the actions they have done that hurt us, and guilt for our actions that have hurt ourselves or others. And expectation is a form of thinking in the mind that tends to be quite incessant, and that expectation is thinking about something in the future that we believe will fulfill the lack in this moment. And when that in the future is not delivered, that which we are continually thinking about, when it's not delivered, we'll either blame life or we'll blame whoever plays a part in it not being delivered. So that expectation, that continuous thinking, disturbs the current moment, makes the current moment feel as though it's incomplete, or actually it's the feeling that there's incompleteness in this current moment that inspires the thinking of expectation in the future. And that expectation can turn into guilt or blame for oneself or the other. So in practical terms, we now understand, both conceptually here and if tested for yourself, what one's unhappiness in the flow of life is. So the question, what is it that we are looking for, can start to be answered for ourselves based on our own observation, and that is that I am actually just looking for the end of my unhappiness. And for ourselves, we know that unhappiness, when it's felt, is in the form of guilt or blame or expectation. So what we're really saying is actually what we're looking for is the end of guilt, blame and expectation. Now, if life is how we've always seen it to be, and we've always seen it to be a three-dimensional reality in which there are many people all doing exactly what they choose to do based on their own control and volition, if we see life like that, and we see ourselves as the body, see the others as the body, and believe that we require pleasure in the moment and that the others require pleasure in the moment to be complete, if that is an accurate representation of life, then it's fair to say that our unhappiness in the form of the absence of suffering is simply not available. Because if someone was in control of their actions, then if they hurt me, it makes no sense to ignore the fact. It makes sense to blame them. If I blame people enough, then they will start to learn and will start to use their volition to deliver pleasure to me, which is what I believe I need. So if life was as we currently see it, guilt and blame and expectation makes plenty of sense, and so the absence of that wouldn't be available. The good news is that we've been told, and we can see for ourselves, that life is not as we have seen it. Life has been described as a dream, as a predetermined story, a creation. And what that means is that this manifestation of life that is being experienced moment to moment by all of us is not actually something that we bring about based on our choosing. Our destiny is not in our control, as we've sometimes hear or like to think. But what it means, if this is all a creation or predestined story, a dream, then it means that what we are integrally is part of that creation, part of that dream, part of that predestined story, and everything that happens through us is not actually our doing, but a happening according to the predestined story, or a happening according to the dream, the dreamer, or God's will, if you like. Now, to take the leap from seeing life the way we've always seen it to then just accept that it's predetermined can be a little big at first. So how can we check out whether this concept that life is predetermined, how can we check out if it holds water, or if at least we'd like to investigate it further? And the first thing to do is to challenge our existing ideas, which are that whatever happens in the moment is based on my choice and my control, and that whatever the other does, therefore, because the other is like me, a human being, whatever the other does is based on their control and volition in the moment. So if we start to look at what is it that we are, what is it that I am as a human being, with an objective set of observations, without needing the outcome to be a certain way, without insisting that the answer to this investigation is what we want it to be, if we just look at it objectively, we'll find that the human being is a biological instrument, a very magnificently created biological instrument, including a brain, which in essence is a biological set of neural pathways, all functioning based on electromagnetic impulses. So that machine, the brain, is a biological machine through which electromagnetic impulse is happening, and so what we call my thinking is actually an output of a set of physical laws. So this biological instrument is the way it is at any point in time because of its genes and up-to-date conditioning. We know that when we were born, we didn't choose the genes that we have, and from the moment we were born, up-to-date conditioning started to happen. And so at any point in time, what happens through the body is based on the circumstance that the body finds itself in and the particular makeup of the body at that point in time. And the particular makeup of the body is based on two factors, genes and up-to-date conditioning, that we've never had any control on. The circumstance we find ourselves in includes many, many situations or variables that we have no control over. Who walks in front of us, what bird flies across the sky, what sounds are present in the moment, what body pains are there, what thoughts arise. All of this is totally out of our control. So we find that the body is a biological instrument based on genes and up-to-date conditioning, and in each moment it will react to the circumstance, and in some moments decisions need to be made. Those decisions will lead to actions, and we are very habituated in saying these are my decisions, these are my actions, rather than recognizing that what could be happening is that thoughts are arising, actions are happening, consequences to those actions are happening, all of which is not actually in our control as we've previously believed. If we look at the process of thinking, we find that a thought just arises out of nowhere based on the conditioning, up-to-date conditioning of the body and the circumstance at hand. Something is seen, smelt, tasted, touched or heard, and that set of impulses or inputs brings about the arising of a thought, and we weren't in control of what was seen, smelt, tasted, touched or heard, and as a result we are not in control of what thought is inspired. And even if we're sitting quietly in a kitchen or a living room looking around, suddenly a thought might arise about a holiday that we have planned, or something that happened between friends, or some food that was eaten yesterday that tasted good, and the thought just pops up, and that thought can roll on for 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes, and then it can turn into thinking about something else, which we're so sure is my thinking. Actually, we were just sitting in the living room and then thinking about food that we had eaten or exchange with friends just popped up. And it could easily have been a thought popping up about work, or a thought popping up about your passed away grandmother or grandfather, or whatever it happens to be, something you need to do in the garden. We weren't in control of whether the thought about something to do in the garden pops up, or a thought about something at work popping up. And hence life carries on. That thought might inspire the body to get up and go and do something in the garden, if it's a thought about gardening. And when in the garden, you might prick yourself on the rose bush, not something you intended to do, but something that happened, and based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning, the body will react to that prick, first with a physical reaction, and secondly with a follow-up set of actions as to what to do about it, whether to go to the doctor and get it checked out, get it disinfected, whether to just put a band-aid on it. And so life unfolds. And we've thought that all of this is my doing. And therefore, if it's my doing, that whatever happens through the other is their doing. And hence we start to see life differently to how it actually unfolds. So if we find that our previous idea that we were in control, with some very simple observations, starts to lose the ground that it was previously standing on, we can then at least say that the notion that I'm in control is not in line with life. So maybe the opposite, which is everything is just happening, everything is predetermined, can be a valid explanation for how life is. Now, if we come to accept that I'm not in control by watching things happen moment to moment and seeing that life unfolds according to its own plan and not according to what we want it to be in a day. Sometimes the day unfolds in line with what we want, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it unfolds differently but still favorably, but someone rings up halfway through the day and says, we're having a lunch party, do you want to come over for lunch? And at the beginning of the day it was not at all something you had considered doing, but the invitation is accepted based on your genes and your up-to-date conditioning at that point in time. So if life is predetermined, then the notion that I'm in control and the other in control falls away, which means the basis on which guilt and blame, which is a large part of our unhappiness, the basis of guilt and blame is now no longer there. What happens in practical terms is that the belief systems start to change. Life has delivered a set of observations that no longer allow the current held set of beliefs to remain in place in the same intensity as they did before. And as these belief systems start to change, it can become very easy for us to notice how many belief systems we have in place that may actually be incorrect. Because the nature of human beings is to get given a concept and believe it, turn it into a truth. Parents have told us that we need to do something a certain way, and it's unquestioned and turned into the way that we should behave. Society have told us that we have to do certain things, and we turn it into a truth, all because we are concerned about outcomes delivering pleasure. If society tells us to do something, it's told us to do something because it's pleasure to society. And because we're very concerned about delivering pleasure to society in order for society to deliver pleasure back to us, we conform within the set of rules. If we realize that seeking pleasure is what keeps us away from our real happiness, then we'll stop putting pleasure on the pedestal and start to question the set of rules which have governed how we live our lives, and maybe decide that actually what's most important is my own happiness, and my own happiness is not going to be delivered through pleasure in the moment, and therefore I'm going to stop following the rules that society have dictated, and I'm going to dance to the beat of my own drum, knowing that there is still going to be consequences. So if the beat of your own drum is outside of the legal frameworks and you get caught by the law, then you'll have to suffer the consequences. However, in a lot of situations in daily living, what we are doing is following a set of rules that are not governed by legal frameworks. They're just simple social rules that we've decided are best for us. And we've often decided that they're best for us without really understanding what we're looking for. We've decided that these social rules are best for us based on our previous idea of who we are and our previous idea of what we want. And so time comes when we start challenging all of these concepts that we have in place. And as more and more of these concepts fall away, these beliefs about how we should act and how we shouldn't act, what we should do and what we shouldn't do, we find that we're able to act more spontaneously, we're able to listen to the body more, we're able to not have to do something that internally we're feeling like we'd rather not do. And that in itself starts to bring about a significant amount of freedom.